I'm Tina Fordham and you're watching The Navigator, our digital playbook for geopolitics, produced in collaboration with the London Stock Exchange. Today's March 15th, so I'm going to start by cautioning you to beware the Ides of March. That's the warning, of course, that was given to Julius Caesar on this day, and we all know what happened to him later. This quote from Shakespeare is often used to warn of other risks, so it seems an appropriate reference for our conversation on the geopolitical risks that investors and business leaders need to watch for this month. Now that I've got your attention, what are these risks? Well, in 2024, there are many. Given the advent of the new geopolitical risk supercycle, that's the convergence between a structural increase in conflicts, more elections in 1 year than ever before, against fewer buffers to mitigate the risks. If that sounds like a lot, it's because it really is. The period between 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, and 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, was the most peaceful and prosperous period in human history, and that is when most of us grew up professionally. That's what we're used to. Now let's look at the March Navigator watch list, where we plot the geopolitical risks most likely to move markets along a trajectory of priced in on the left and systemic on the right. The war in the Middle East still has room to run, unfortunately, with President Biden warning Israeli PM Netanyahu not to undertake an offensive in Rafah or risk crossing a so-called U.S. red line. Netanyahu, for his part, has vowed to do exactly that. More specifically, the Ramadan ceasefire that had been hoped for isn't likely to materialize, and the extraordinary step of the U.S. and other countries going around Israel to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza represents an important change in trend in the U.S.-Israeli alliance. The war isn't driving up oil prices at the moment, so investors are largely ignoring it. But business leaders should not, as the trajectory of the Middle East conflict will continue to be a major factor in regional dynamics, including trade relations, supply chain stability, and more. Moving now to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the conventional wisdom is that this confrontation has reached a stalemate. But Putin's recent threats about using nuclear weapons should refocus our attention on why this conflict is systemically significant, meaning it could once again move markets. I see very little chance of diplomacy ahead of U.S. elections in November, and indeed, Putin himself has said as much. In a recent interview, he said he won't enter talks just because Ukraine is running out of ammunition. The Pope may have said that Ukraine should wave a white flag, but there is no support for doing so in Kyiv, and winning on the battlefield would certainly appeal to Putin. Speaking of winning, Russian presidential elections will take place over the weekend, and though they are more accurately described as a plebiscite, this exercise is extremely important to the Kremlin, which has long telegraphed its expectation that Putin's fifth term would see him re-elected by a resounding popular margin. Putin's re-election is not in doubt, but what I'm going to be watching is whether the outpouring of grief over Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's assassination results in disruption at polling stations, because that's something that Navalny had reportedly been recommending before his death in a Siberian prison 2 weeks ago. Finally, populism is another political risk theme that we track closely, and so I want to close with the elections in Portugal last week, a small country on the edge of Europe, but one with GDP roughly the same size as Russia. After having been seemingly immune to the far-right resurgence seen in much of Europe, Portuguese elections delivered a surprise, a strong performance from a new far-right party called Chega, which means enough. This is significant for a couple of reasons. First, that the party appealed mainly to young voters in Portugal who don't have a personal memory of the fascist dictatorship of António Salazar. Salazar's regime ruled from 1932 to 1974, one of the longest authoritarian regimes in Europe. It's notable that Chega adapted the slogan of Salazar's Estado Novo party, changing it to God, Country, Family, and Work, a real blast from the past. I don't think Chega will move to take Portugal out of the EU, but its sudden emergence is a reminder of many things, especially the power of political nostalgia. With that in mind, a major factor to watch in this year's election will be the political choices of younger voters who came of age during the global financial crisis. They feel locked out of the social contract and are highly influenced by social media campaigning. So let's leave it there. Remember that fortune favors the brave and chance favors the prepared mind. And thank you for joining me today.